It's time for The Real Messiah with your host, Messianic Jewish author and scholar, Dr. Michael Brown. Here to open up the scriptures, answer your questions, and help you discover Israel's true Messiah. Join the discussion now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Hey friends, it is great to be back with you tonight on the Real Messiah broadcast. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been with you on WMCA all over New York City and coming your way on YouTube and Facebook as well. We were preempted by some sports events, some basketball games, part of a contract WMCA has that comes up here and there, but great to be back with you. 866-34-TRUTH. If you are a Jewish person with questions about Jesus the Messiah, if you object to me as a Jew being a follower of Yeshua, if you want to talk Messianic prophecy or specific issues, phone lines are open, 866-34-TRUTH. Before we go to the phones tonight, I want to address a video. I've been asked about it by a few different friends, so I wanted to take a few minutes to address this. Rabbi Tovia Singer, counter-missionary rabbi, with whom I had two debates in the early 90s, one private, one public. Since that time, he's refused to debate me or have any dealings with me. So this is over 25 years now. I remain wide open to debate him on a serious level with a good format where we can lay everything out and have good mutual exchange, cross-examination, etc. Let the audience question us. Would love to, would be delighted to. But this video was pointed out to me, and Rabbi Singer is in Israel. He's doing a talk, and at the end of it, a Messianic Jew asks him about a couple of things. One is Daniel 9, Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27. And according to this Messianic Jew, it gives a prophecy that tells us the very day that Jesus was going to come, or the very day that Jesus was going to be crucified. So it's a very specific prophecy. How can that possibly be denied? Rabbi Singer responds to that. And then Psalm 22, the argument is that in the oldest Hebrew manuscripts, the oldest Hebrew texts, that the text would read, they pierced my hands and feet rather than like a lion. They're at my hands and feet. Psalm 22, many Christians look at as the crucifixion psalm. And Tovia responds to that. So I've been asked about this. And I thought, since we're always trying to instruct, we're always trying to educate, we're always trying to interact in a constructive way, it would be worth it to take some time on tonight's broadcast to open these things up and to interact with Rabbi Singer. First, let me give this little bit of background. Daniel 9, 24 to 27, I believe, ultimately should be read as a Messianic prophecy. Some would argue it had an earlier reference to the defiling of the temple under Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, so 160 or so years before Jesus, and it's speaking of the consecration of the temple there. But it's clear to me and to many others that it's speaking of something more than that. And what I've argued is not for the exact day of the Messiah's coming. I've not argued that you can find the exact day of the Messiah's coming or the exact day of the Messiah's crucifixion, as some have argued, but rather that what's clear is that the Messiah had to come and accomplish his work of redemption, that he had to come and make atonement for our sins before the second temple was destroyed in Daniel 9, 24 to 27. And in that sense, in that regard, that is a significant Messianic prophecy. Rabbi Singer takes issue with that very strongly and raises this point. In fact, he gets quite exercised over this. So let's listen to clip number 1 from Rabbi Singer's presentation.
You have to believe that not one writer or apostolic father, that means Clement I of Rome, it's Daniel 9, meaning the text from verse 24 and 25, 24, 25, 26, and 7 is never quoted in the Christian Bible. They just went, yeah, we do have the exact calculation of Jesus' death, but there are more important things than that.
Ah, actually, that's kind of a glaring, shocking statement by Rabbi Singer. Extraordinarily so, in fact. Yeah. Nobody, no New Testament writer makes reference to it. Nobody. How about Jesus himself? How about Matthew 24:15? Excuse me, Matthew 24:15. Yeshua says, "So when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place," and he goes on and says, "let the reader take note." This is the only time that this unique expression is used, Matthew 24 and the parallel in Mark 13, where Jesus is specifically saying, take note, look at this text, take note of this. And where is that passage? Well, the abomination of desolation is mentioned a few times in Daniel, including Daniel 9:27. So Yeshua himself is saying, look at this passage. Make sure you look at it. And it's obviously something having to do with the destruction of the temple that was going to come, and he was warning his followers about it. So he's drawing our attention to this very prophecy. Quite remarkable. Rabbi Singer says no one quotes it, no one makes reference to it. No, Jesus himself makes explicit reference to it. Now, we also know, Paul writing Galatians 4 mentions the Messiah coming in the fullness of time, and there was a sense there are other Jewish traditions inside and outside what becomes rabbinic Judaism that make reference to this text as well. And this is fairly well known. It doesn't you research it online and get some good academic papers that are available online that go through this and how things were looked at chronologically. But there was a sense, others have written about it as well. There was a sense of living in this time, this fullness of time, this Messianic era. In fact, from what we understand, the Essenes at Qumran had calculated things using the 70 weeks and were expecting the revelation of Messiah, which would have been, 30 or so years before, 35 years before Jesus was crucified. The point is, though, that Jesus refers to this and points to this very passage, telling us to take note. So the very thing Rabbi Singer said, it was so important, somebody would have pointed to, Jesus did, and tell us to take note of it. So that's the first thing. That's big. That's very major. And by the way, I've addressed this at great length, from Rashi's commentary to current counter-missionary work. Some of the very, very weakest work that's ever been done, in my view, some of the worst and weakest arguments that have been given to Daniel 9:24-27. I've interacted candidly with folks that I think this is some of the weakest what I've seen. And even Rashi's commentary, what's he actually saying? It's somehow messianic, but future. And anyway, it really breaks down, So the Messiah had to come and accomplish his atoning work before the second temple was destroyed. And the Messiah himself pointed readers to that text in conjunction with the destruction of the temple spoken of in that very passage. As to the idea, well, why don't the apostolic fathers talk about it? How come none of them talk about it? Well, for the most part, they're not writing about messianic prophecy or proving things to Jews or other. These are pastoral letters and things like that dealing with issues. But you have within the first 2 centuries, so the early part of what others would call the Christian era, references being made to this very passage, Daniel 9:24-27. Again, I just checked to see what you can find online. Look for early Christian interpretation of Daniel's 70 weeks, and you'll find references from early on in Christian literature. Where did they get the idea? Perhaps the fact that Jesus drew attention to the passage? All right, let's go over to Psalm 22. And Rabbi Singer there is referencing Psalm 22:17 in Hebrew, 16 in some of our English translations. And should the text say like a lion, my hands and feet, in which case Rashi says like a lion, they mauled my hands and feet, because there's a verb missing, like a lion, my hands and feet. So they're like a lion, they're at my hands and feet, they're mauling my hands and feet, which would still work as a good description of crucifixion. Or could it be that other ancient texts and translations indicate that the correct reading is they pierced? So let's take a look at what Rabbi Singer says, clip number 3.
Before I even go into this, why isn't this quoted in the Christian Bible? That means if first century Christians believed that it's said, that means if we're lying and the first followers of Yeshua, okay, I played by the rules, believe that said they pierced my hands and my feet, you have to believe that they didn't think that was an important enough verse to quote.
Actually, very surprising again. Yeshua himself hanging on the cross, quotes from Psalm 22:1, drawing our attention to the entire psalm. That's one reason he cries it out on the cross, to draw our attention to the psalm. And then other specific instances from the Psalms, how the mockers mock him using the language of Psalm 22, how they part his garments among them using a very specific description in Psalm 22. That's enough to draw our attention. And by the way, the New Testament makes reference to Isaiah 53 in a number of different ways, clearly telling us it's messianic, clearly telling us to look at it, but it doesn't quote every key verse. You know, he was wounded for our transgressions. It doesn't quote all of that relevant section there. It just quotes parts here and there. That happens with other Psalms as well, and other prophecies as well. That attention is drawn to the Psalm as a whole, or to the passage as a whole, or to the chapter as a whole. That's what the New Testament does. So Psalm 22 is clearly featured in the New Testament, and is definitely something that the eyes of the New Testament authors were on, and the early followers of Yeshua were certainly looking at, without question. So again, I'm surprised. I'm surprised by how this breaks down, but it gets much, much worse. And what troubles me is people will see Rabbi Singer's video or be in his audience and think that what he was saying was accurate, think that what he was saying was factual because he was so passionate about it. But as you're about to see in front of your eyes, friends, it completely breaks down. Clip number 4.
Every single Bible in the whole world says the same word in Hebrew. Not one Bible ever found says they pierced.
Oh, sorry. Squirming a little bit. Okay. He's saying every Hebrew text, every Hebrew Bible that's ever been found reads ka'ari, like a lion. None of them read ka'aru, which is taken to mean they pierced or they dug through, as a biform of karu. None of them say that. Rather, they all say ka'ari, like a lion. Not a single Hebrew manuscript, not a single Hebrew Bible in the entire world ever has read that way. Ever, ever, ever. None of them say this alleged ka'aru. None of them say karu. Okay. I guess Rabbi Singer is not familiar with the massive collocation of all Masoretic manuscripts done by two scholars separately a few centuries back, Kennicott and de Rossi. So these are books written in Latin that give every last Masoretic manuscript. And so you have to understand there are thousands of Masoretic manuscripts, and there are all kinds of variations. All right. So I copied this out. Okay. You can actually access the book in PDF form online. I copied this out. I magnified it. I underlined a few things. So I'm going to put it on the screen. If you're listening, I'll do my best to explain. But let's go to image 5, clip number 5. And I'm sorry. First Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, that's the right image. Put that up. Number 5. Put that back up. Okay. So first from Qumran Cave 4Q88, with further reference. This is a fragment from Psalm 22. Now, it has the letters for Hikifuni, and they are written with these little circles on top, meaning that the text is not 100% clear. All right. But then there's Kaf Resh, and then a Vav, Karu. All right. So the Vav is not certain, and then Yadai, Baraglai, so my hands and my feet. But notice there's no Aleph there. This text is from Hasmonean times, so this text is from well before the time of Jesus, all right? And it does not have the Aleph. And the most likely reading is Karu, but certainly it does not have the Aleph there, which would support the idea that the text originally said Karu or Ka'aru. And Karu, as we'll show in a little while, can mean to dig through, to bore through, hence can be used, obviously, to cut through, to bore through. Crucifixion would obviously work well with that concept. And then, although he tries to downplay this from Nachal Hever, so these texts were a little bit later. This would be from a century or so after Jesus, but many of these have been dated to well before Jesus. But either way, these are Jewish texts, okay? These are Jewish texts, Jewish collections. So there we have Ka'aru. You say, well, I think it's just a yud at the end. It's Ka'ari. The best Dead Sea Scroll scholars have examined this and looked at this. People who specialize in orthography, and they don't have an axe to grind. They're just transcribing what it says, and they're all looking at the same pictures and then studying it in person, looking at it. Karu is the best reading, all right? But what about the Masoretic manuscripts? Let's go to clip number 6 here, our 6th image. Let's look at this. And Kai, just leave this up for a little while. All right, so again, if you're listening on radio and you're not watching, I'm going to do my best to explain this to you. But what you have here is a series of numbers. And what it's telling you is, okay, in this particular manuscript, which scholars number as thus and such, number 4, 38, or 40, etc., that the main Masoretic text means one thing, but you have X number of manuscripts that read something different. So, for example, instead of ka'ari, like a lion, you have one manuscript, number 245, that reads ka'aryeh. These are Masoretic manuscripts, Masoretic Hebrew texts, late medieval and after, okay? So it's a more full spelling of lion, ka'aryeh, instead of ka'ari. But you have the text, and I underlined it, ka'aru, kaf, aleph, resh, vav, which Rabbi Singer said does not exist in a single Masoretic text, Masoretic Bible, anywhere in the world. False, 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 false. How many times false? Well, here you have it. Manuscript number 39, 267, 270, 277, and then 288 and 660, and then some other variations. Then you have some other marginal ones. So overall, you have it attested about 8 different times. You say, well, it's just 8. Hey, when someone says none exist, when someone says there is not a manuscript on the planet where this exists, and here, and any scholar knows the Kennecott collection, okay? DeRossi then just supplemented it with errors and with variations in the vowels as well. But any Hebrew scholar, biblical scholar, is familiar with this compilation. It is just a list of the Masoretic manuscripts, Masoretic Hebrew manuscripts. When Rabbi Singer says, never occurs, 0, no manuscripts, no Hebrew Bible, nowhere, and he's very dramatic about it. Well, you got at least 8 times. And then 4 or 5 times you have karu. So this is a legitimate variant in these Masoretic manuscripts, karu or karu. Okay, so as I said, I'm kind of shocked to see these things. And I want to play one more clip from Rabbi Singer. But I just have to honestly say, I watch this stuff in a state of shock, just on a scholarly level. Forget polemics. Forget who's right or wrong. Forget any of that for the moment, okay? Obviously, those are life and death issues, who the Messiah is and how we respond to him. Of course, I understand that. But just putting aside, just simply from the standpoint of Hebrew scholarship, biblical scholarship, manuscript scholarship, it's kind of shocking to see these things. I don't mean to be insulting. It's just when people make a big deal of it and say, well, look at this, he's an authority. Maybe on certain things, I don't know. But these areas, clearly not. Okay, so let's listen again to Rabbi Singer. Clip number 7.
This is Sheker v'chazav is a lie. Kaf, Aleph, Resh, Vav. What does that word mean? Anybody? What is the word in Hebrew where I'm standing here in the land of Israel, filled with Hebrew speakers? You all don't tell me none of you speak Hebrew. Kaf, Aleph, Resh, Vav. What does this word mean? It means nothing. There is no such word. I'm not going to get into it. You can't have a verb with the aleph in it as the root. I don't want to get complicated. There is no such word. You have been lied to.
Oh, that really makes me squirm. Whoa, unreal. Oh, okay, so let's first start. He's going to ask a Hebrew-speaking audience what karu means, and they say nothing. There's no such word. Okay. First problem is there are many words from biblical Hebrew and biblical vocabulary that are not used in Hebrew today. In fact, I embarrassed myself talking to Israelis in the 70s when I was studying Hebrew because my biblical Hebrew was much better than my modern, and I'd say things in biblical Hebrew and they'd shake their heads. No, this is the way you say it now. We don't use those terms. Not that they were bad terms, but just they're not used anymore. Expressions, grammatical things. So he's going to prove a point about a biblical Hebrew word from 3,000 years ago and say, well, is it spoken today? If not, it's gibberish. I guess, though, what gets the biggest reaction from me is when he says you can't have an aleph as a root. You can't have an aleph as a root letter in a Hebrew verb. So in other words, this has a middle aleph, kaf, aleph, resh, right? You can't have an aleph in a verbal root. What? I, I mean, how many how many verbs do you have? I mean, just go. How do you say to elucidate? It's beit aleph resh, that verb. All right. To worry, dalet aleph gimel. To redeem, gimel aleph lamed. I mean, word after word after word. To weary, lamed aleph hey. Slowness is connected with lamed aleph tet. I mean, on and on. Example after example after example after example. Just take just biblical Hebrew lexicon, or even a modern Hebrew lexicon if you want to. You'll see the same phenomena there. You just go through it and look for each verbal roots, and then just scroll down to where aleph would be the second one. You have example after example after example. Words that he knows perfectly well. So what was that? Was that just a total brain freeze? Or was there an intentional attempt to mislead an audience? Either way, that makes me squirm. And then what about this idea that there is no root, kaf, aleph, resh? Well, may I just do this again? I know we're on radio, so you can watch this later on YouTube at Ask Dr. Brown, AskKDR Brown. You can watch this, but I'm just going to put a few images up on the screen. And Kai, keep the image up until I tell you to switch. Let's look at image number 8. This is from the Klein's Hebrew Lexicon, Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, one of the greatest modern scholarly accomplishments in the Hebrew language, not just using Hebrew Bible, but Dead Sea Scrolls, etc. It has two possible roots, kaf, aleph, resh. All right? Two possible roots. And one of them is pointing to Psalm 22, the very verse we're looking at, based on manuscript evidence, some of the evidence we just looked at, Masoretic manuscript evidence. So that's a possible one. Does it mean to bind? There's speculation there. And then there's another root, kaf, aleph, resh, meaning to be repulsive. It's reflected in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are citations given there, etc. The word kaor, repulsive, and then it could be they're made repulsive, mutilated. Is that what it's talking about in Psalm 22? So the question is, how do these relate to Psalm 22? But these are two different entries under a root that Rabbi Singer says never existed. Not only do we have it attested in the Dead Sea Scrolls and at Psalm 22 and Nachal Hever in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but we have it used in other ways as well. So the root exists. The root certainly exists. Okay, so that's one scholarly lexicon used by Jewish and Christian Old Testament scholars. All right, let's look at image number 9. This is from the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament that started as Kohler Baumgartner. Then others worked on it as well, including the great Aramaic scholar Yechezkel Kutcher, Israeli scholar. This is widely used by Jewish and Christian scholars studying the Hebrew Bible. And they point to a root kara, kaf, resh, hey, a root kara, meaning, and we've got parallels in Old South Arabian and Arabic and Aramaic and Punic, etc., meaning to dig a channel for a river in some of these other languages, and in the Bible to hollow out, to dig, as in digging a well, Genesis 26:25, or Numbers 21:18, or a cistern in Exodus 21:3, and verse after verse, digging out a pit. In Psalm 40, Osnaim karitali, you have dug out, so opened up my ears. All right? So this is a potential reading in some manuscripts, and in one Dead Sea Scroll manuscript, karu, meaning they dug out my hands and feet. Again, if it has to do with digging out, with piercing, is it related concept? Could well be. Many scholars believe that is the case, hence the usage there in a very violent way, pointing to crucifixion. And then the other argument is that ka'aru is just a biform of karu, and we know that this often happens where the aleph is part of a biform of a word. Just look at how it occurs in Hebrew and Aramaic in terms of certain words with what would be called weak roots, all right? So with a vav in the middle or something like that, sometimes you go to Aramaic, has an aleph. So these are all perfectly plausible. Sorry if I lost anyone, but Last image, okay? All right, the Brown Driver Biggs lexicon. This came out in the early 1900s, an edition of the famous Gesenius lexicon, and one of the most widely used to this day by scholars of the Hebrew language, both Jewish and Christian. So at Psalm 22 has Ari, lion, gives the references there. But then it says this, that they're suggesting reading ka'aru, which equals karu. So they dug through, they dug out my hands and feet, which would then mirror the Septuagint. They pierced my hands and feet. And contrary to Rabbi Singer, there's ample evidence of the Septuagint being completed as a Jewish work before the time of Jesus. So bottom line, here's what we get. And we're done with that image. We're good now. Number one, massive error on Daniel 9. If it was so important, why wasn't it referred to? It is. It is by Jesus, Matthew 24, Mark 13. And not only so, early church leaders make reference to it as well, recognizing its significance having to do with Messianic prophecy before the Second Temple was destroyed. That's number one. Number two, Psalm 22, quoted, referred to explicitly in the New Testament. Therefore, you're going to read all the passages, including they pierced my hands and feet. All right. Number three, Dead Sea Scroll evidence supporting a reading of karu without an aleph, therefore not like a lion. And then, yes, Nachal Hever, Qumran scroll, strongly pointing to ka'aru with a vav, not a yud. So again, not like a lion. And then, contrary to Rabbi Singer's denial, saying there's not a single Hebrew manuscript in the world, Masoretic manuscript, that reads this way. I post this actual image from the Kennecott volume where he lists the Masoretic manuscripts that read ka'aru or karu. All right. And then on top of that, extraordinary error, mind-bogglingly error, saying that you're not going to have a verbal root with an aleph in it. Again, either he failed to explain himself or just had brain freeze. That can happen to anybody. But when people think then immediately correct the video or pull that part or make a statement, I made an error there. And then that there's no root ka'ar. Well, there is, and it's attested in lexicons in different contexts. And there are explanations as to how you can have kara or ka'ar and how they are related. So can we prove that the earliest reading was they pierced or they dug through my hands and my feet? Can't prove it, but there's very, very strong evidence for it. And by the way, even if it was like a lion, my hands and feet, the verb is missing. Hence the explanation, like a lion, they mauled my hands and feet, which was also an excellent description of crucifixion. So this would be one of these things of like, when a pitcher strikes out the sides on 9 pitches, swing and miss at each one. Each major point he was making was a swing and a miss. So I just wanted to take the time to set the record straight. Truth. Pursue the truth. Follow the truth. It's worth it. Hey friends, this is Michael Brown. Over the years, going on almost 50 years now of interacting with our Jewish people about Jesus, there's so many objections that have been raised. I wrote 5 whole volumes, over 1,500 pages, on answering Jewish objections to Jesus, and then recorded a 22-hour lecture series on the same subject. But that's a lot of material to take in. I want to put something in your hands absolutely free. If you are a Jewish person wanting to find out the truth about Jesus the Messiah, I want to put this book in your hands absolutely free. It's a mini book. It's an easy read, but it's a page turner. Each new page you'll be wanting to turn the next. It's called 7 Secrets of the Real Messiah. You can get it as a mini book in paperback, or you can get the ebook. Now here's how you get it. Go to my website, realmessiah.com. That's realmessiah.com, and click on the free ebook offer, and then explore the website. You'll find testimonies of other Jewish people who believe in Jesus the Messiah. You'll find teachings we do on the feasts and holy days and rabbinic literature and insights from there into Jesus being the Messiah. We even have a synopsis of major objections with video and written answers, all waiting for you at realmessiah.com. Get the free mini book today.
It's time for The Real Messiah with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Join the discussion now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome back, friends, to The Real Messiah, 866-34-TRUTH. If anything I was saying was unintelligible to you, my apologies. I did my best to respond in a way that would be helpful and useful without taking time to explain I tried to explain enough to give you background and context, but obviously can't explain every last detail if you're utterly unfamiliar with the relevant text. But if you're listening and you are familiar, hey, you think I'm wrong on anything, call me. That's why we pay to be on live radio so that you can call in. 866-34-TRUTH. I am going to go to the phones. I'm going to start in Florida with Jerry. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
What's going on, Doc? How you doing?
Doing well, man. Thank you.
You're one of my favorite non-Calvinists. So I want to. This is my first time calling you, so I'm excited about this.
Sweet, thank you.
I have it's a two-part question actually, and I've been dealing with Black Hebrew Israelites for a little while now, and my question is based on Deuteronomy 28.
Yeah.
How supposedly that all Egypt represents America, et cetera, and Zechariah 14:16 that seems to speak of the perpetual feast. When my understanding is that the feast pointed to Christ. So those are my understanding. You're the expert. I know you're the guy. You teach James White this stuff. I know you're the man. So love you, brother. God bless you, man.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay, so first. Zechariah 14, speaking of celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles in the Millennial Kingdom, I believe that will happen. We understand that the Feast of the Spring, so Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and Shavuot, Pentecost, all point to the Messiah. So yes, they have the historical realities, all those things we understand, we embrace, and then they point to the Messiah's death on the cross, the atonement we received through him, his resurrection from the dead, and then the outpouring of the Spirit 50 days later. The fall feast we see is still future. So his returning with the sound of the shofar, the trumpet blast, the ram's horn, his bringing national atonement to Israel, so Rosh Hashanah or Yom Teruah, the Day of Trumpets, which becomes the Jewish New Year, and then after that, bringing national atonement to Israel, Yom Kippur, and then after that, Sukkot, Tabernacles, which also points to the ingathering of the nations. So Zechariah 14 is telling us that once the Messiah comes and establishes his kingdom on the earth, that in point of fact, that Sukkot will be celebrated, maybe other things, but certainly that, because that is celebrating the ingathering of the nations. So that's the first thing. When it comes to Deuteronomy 28, whoa, okay, sorry about that. That was my bad. I guess Jerry just hung up to listen. Okay, so when it comes to Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68, Hebrew Israelites claim that this verse is only fulfilled in them and that it was never fulfilled with the Jewish people. The first thing, it was conditional. If there'd be a certain level of disobedience, these curses would take place. But actually, it was fulfilled in Jewish history, and it cannot refer to the Hebrew Israelites. And the Lord will bring you back in ships to Egypt. So bring you back, all right, in ships to Egypt. Well, Egypt is house of bondages, and that symbolizes America. Well, no, it's talking about literal Egypt, and it's talking about going back to Egypt from whence they came. Okay, so the Hebrew is a bringing back, not bringing, but a bringing back. So that's the first thing. When were Africans first in America, and then brought back there in ships? So no, it's talking about Egypt. You say, well, when were Jews brought there in ships? Some would argue that when the Assyrians conquered Samaria in the northern kingdom, that they then shipped Israelites by sea down to Egypt as slaves. But for sure, we have writings from the first 2 centuries with the destruction of Jerusalem in the first and second Jewish wars of Jewish slaves being sold into captivity into Egypt. So it did happen, literally. The other thing is The other thing is not only does it talk about bringing people back to Egypt, all right, but it says it says also in the text. Let me just keep reading. There you shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but none will buy. Hebrew Israelites cannot apply that to themselves because they were bought left and right in America, and they weren't selling themselves either. And you say, yeah, but buy, that means redeem, it means something else. No, when you have the words buy and sell in the same verse in Hebrew, that means buy and sell. So if you want to find one verse in the Bible that refutes Hebrew Israelite arguments in theology, it's the verse they argue for the most, Deuteronomy 28:68. And by the way, these folks claim that today's Jews are not really Jews, that we're imposters, that they're the original Israelites. There are Black Jews. There are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through intermarriage, through other means from Africa, who are rightly considered Jews today. The Ethiopian Jews, Lemba tribe in Zimbabwe, some others, all right, that are legitimate Jews. And some of them are believers in Jesus, some are not. But the Hebrew Israelites, even if some of their original founders may have been among these Black Jews, they are a cult outside of the faith, denying the gospel message and quite deceived about their national identity and quite deceived in claiming today's Jews are not really Jews. 866-34-TRUTH. Let's go to Dave in New Jersey. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Dr. Brown, how are you, my friend?
Doing very well. Thanks, sir.
Yes, this is Dave, your Muslim friend.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah. Before I ask my question, I just a little bit of background. When I broke with Christian theology, I thought about converting to Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that it would be difficult for me to, follow the mitzvahs of the Torah properly, some of them, because I happen to be blind. And some of the practices require eyesight.
Well, but isn't there, just to jump in, Judaism recognizes that there's certain commandments that are not obligatory on a woman, for example, that would be obligatory on a man because of her responsibilities, perhaps with a child or things like that. So Judaism recognizes limitations because of physical handicaps or challenges, and would therefore not require certain things to be done by someone who is blind or deaf, etc.
Mm-hmm. And but my situation, which I can't get into over the radio, is a little bit more unique.
Okay. Yeah. Got it though.
Right.
All clear. Yep.
My question, Dr. Brown, is if I'm going to use the analogy of a pair of shoes. Okay. If the older pair of shoes is still fitting, why should someone, who has been wearing that older pair of shoes for years and years, if each shoe fits on each foot, why in turn should they change just because they're told to change? In other words, my Jewish brothers and sisters who have been observing the Shabbos, keeping the kosher laws, celebrating the Yom Tovim, the holidays and festivals, if it's working for them and they're getting spiritual fulfillment from it and they feel close to God as a result of it, why should they then, consider changing? Because with all due respect, Dr. Michael Brown comes along and says, I think you need to, believe in a man. Why are you, your belief that you can go directly to the Father, as we believe in Islam the same thing. By the way, we revere Jesus as one of the prophets, as you know, because you've studied.
Mm-hmm.
But if an Orthodox Jew is close to God, and it's bringing them joy and fulfillment, why should they then change and worship somebody who clearly was described as a man?
Mm-hmm. Right. So let me jump in and ask you a couple of questions, just with some verses on my mind. Would you agree that human beings can be deceived?
Absolutely.
Would you agree that we can deceive ourselves sometimes and not even know it?
Yes.
Okay, so let me keep going with this. Um, Proverbs says every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord tests the hearts, and that the way of a man may seem right, but in the end it leads to destruction. So, would you agree that there are things where we deceive ourselves, we think we're on the right path and we're on the wrong path, actually?
Yes. Examples are, the lies of racism and anti-Semitism
Right, and
and
people think that they're
bigotry.
right, and they somehow think that they're right in doing what they did to others.
Because
Okay,
they were raised that way. Well, I
right,
was raised to believe that, about those blacks or those Jews.
right, got it.
So they're,
All right, so we agree with that. So look, there may be an atheist who says, "I don't need God, my life is fine." And you as a Muslim would say that everyone should worship God, and I would say that everyone needs God as a follower of Jesus. So my point is simply that just because someone thinks they're happy or doing well or content doesn't mean that they're right in God's sight. And the whole Bible tells us how Israel did what was right in its own eyes. So we have God's testimony. Jesus warned his people that because they rejected him as the Messiah, the terrible destruction and judgment would come. And it did. The temple was destroyed one generation later. It's not been rebuilt to this day. He said we'd be scattered around the world until the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled. And we have been scattered only in recent generations has the regathering begun. So we have been under divine judgment. If we were right as a people in rejecting Jesus the Messiah, you would have thought that God would have showered blessing on us and said, "Well done, you stood the test." Instead, that's when all hell broke loose against us. And the prophets told us that we would reject the Messiah when he came, and that instead he would become a light to the nations. And I can assure you that the forgiveness of sins that I enjoy through the Messiah is quite different than the hope for forgiveness enjoyed by a traditional Jew. So if someone said the shoes fit well, but now they had to ski down a mountain, I'd say, well, you need skis, even though you like those shoes. And perhaps you like those shoes, but they're summer shoes and now it's 20 below zero. You need other shoes. Or perhaps you like the shoes, but they're worn out and you don't realize it. So the fact that people are happy or content proves nothing. What we have to do, and nor does it prove anything that Michael Brown or a million other people come along saying believe in Jesus. What we have to do is go back to see what the scriptures say. And if the scriptures show us that we're sinful, guilty in God's sight, in need of a redeemer, and that redeemer is the Messiah, then we are in treacherous territory if we reject him.
well, see, I would, I would respectfully, disagree in that one of the conclusions that I've come through, by studying, and I made a promise, from my part, never to use the phrase Old Testament again, because a great friend of mine who's an Orthodox Jew told me that oftentimes, that becomes a slur, meaning that the Torah is arcane. Heaven forbid.
Right. So Tanakh, Hebrew Bible. I use.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but my view of the Christian Testament, which is what I've come through over the years, studying both the Torah, the Christian scriptures, and the Quran, and as you know, I believe the Quran is the final revelation of all the previous scriptures.
Right.
But I think that there are parts of the Christian Testament that are add-ons. In other words, I believe it's a 50-50 book. I think some of what's there.
Yeah, but just real quick, just in deference to other callers, also, Dave, and because we have talked before a few times, if the Hebrew Bible says that there's no atonement without the shedding of blood, if God said that he would destroy, if the temple was destroyed, it would be a sign of his judgment on the nation. If the Messiah warned us of judgment because of our sin. And you say, well, if we're happy, well, hundreds of thousands, if not a million or more Jews died in the 100 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Clear judgment on our nation. It was not a happy time in our history. And then we were scattered, couldn't even get into Jerusalem. Ultimately, the result of our sin of rejecting the Messiah. Shouldn't we take stock of that, sir? It's not a matter of a traditional Jew says, I'm happy. Again, plenty of people say they're happy. That doesn't, they're happy they're the religion. The question is, what's God saying? And God brought judgment on our people. Why? Because we rejected the Messiah. That's serious.
I would respectfully disagree. I think that you know, the judgment, came in so many different levels, and the first judgment, of course, was when the first group of Israelites rejected the Torah.
Right, but I'm talking about in the year 70. But each time, but that's the point, though, Dave, and that's what you need to chew on. In each point, it was divine judgment because of sin. What sin was so great that the temple was destroyed almost 2,000 years ago, and to this day still hasn't been rebuilt? What sin was so great? It was the sin of rejecting the Messiah. As much as God's been with us and preserved us in his love and mercy, we have been under divine judgment. Hey, Dave, I want you to make sure you keep listening on the radio here. We don't focus on Islam. We focus on Jewish issues on Real Messiah broadcast. But I just want to set the record straight on one point. So let's go over to Sam in Chicago. I know you want to make a comment about no middleman in Islam. So when a follower of Jesus says we go to God through Jesus, it doesn't mean we say, Jesus, will you please ask God if he's in a good mood and can I go to God? No, rather he's opened the door. So we go to him as our Father in great intimacy. We call him Abba in the closest, most intimate ways. A Muslim doesn't relate to Allah like that, does he?
Talking to me. Okay, sorry, Dr. Brown, I got confused. I thought you were talking to David. But
no.
Yeah, good to hear from you.
Yeah.
And sorry to interrupt, but yeah, you're just want to say praise God for you. You're my hero, and I just wanted to say something. Though it is common for Muslims who say they have no middleman, that's not a true statement. The Quran itself testifies Islam's middleman is Muhammad, and I know you're pressed for time. I'm just going to look at chapter 4, verse 64. This is of the Quran, chapter 4, verse 64, Surah An-Nisa. It says, we sent not an apostle, but to be obeyed in accordance with the will of God. If they had only, when they were unjust to themselves, come unto you, meaning Muhammad, ask God's forgiveness, and the apostle had asked forgiveness for them, they would not have found God. They would have found God, indeed oft returning most merciful. And this is repeated throughout the Quran, chapter 9, verse 103, chapter 24, verse 62, chapter 47, verse 19. But I want you to catch it. It says that they had to come to Muhammad, Allah's apostle, and that Muhammad would have to ask for their forgiveness. Then Allah would be found to be merciful to them. So this is why even if he's a devout Muslim and he prays 5 times a day, he knows if he's praying 5 times a day, his prayer is incomplete, null and void, if he doesn't specifically ask Allah to bless Muhammad and his family and greet Muhammad in his prayer by saying, Assalamu alayka ayyuha nabi. Peace be upon you, O Prophet. So this notion that there's no middleman in Islam, that is a farce. I'm not saying David is pulling a fast one. He may not know what Islam teaches, but clearly Muhammad has supplanted Jesus in Islam. Now notice the irony here. We believe Jesus is the God-man, perfectly God who became flesh. So when we go to Jesus, we're going to God directly. Whereas Muhammad is a human being, a fallible, imperfect human being, without whom Allah will never forgive you or accept your prayers. So this concept that there's no middleman in Islam, that's a farce, Dr. Brown. So I just wanted to say that real quickly.
Yeah, and yeah, Sam, thanks for calling in. And of course, Muslims do not relate to Allah as Heavenly Father or Abba. That would be a lowering of the deity, because we are in Islam just servants of Allah. And this idea of him being our Heavenly Father or having that intimate heart towards our Abba would be foreign to Islam. But Dave, Sam, thank you for calling in. And Dave, listen, I do enjoy talking to you. I appreciate the fact, Dave, that you have Jewish friends, that you are sensitive to Jewish issues. I do appreciate that. And we can't talk all the time, and we've got to use our time other ways on the show and be fair to other callers. But I appreciate your spirit. I appreciate you listening, and I hope you'll reconsider some of your positions. Let's go quickly. Anthony in San Francisco. Time is short. Dive right in, sir.
Hi, Dr. Brown. I didn't think I'd be able to get on the air.
Yeah,
Thanks
just
for
barely.
having
So
me.
go for it. Yeah.
Big fan of yours. Just had one general question. I've been trying to research the Old Testament to find scriptures as to why Yeshua ended the sacrificial system from the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gotten some verses here and there, but not much. Would you happen to know more verses? Because I know obviously the verses from Isaiah and so forth, but not much else I can think of.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, thanks for the kind words. Let's approach it like this: that within the Tanakh, within the Hebrew Bible, you had the sacrificial system, you had the atonement system. Within that, repentance was always important. But through the Torah, what's most foundational is blood sacrifices, blood sacrifices, blood sacrifices. Then you have the destruction of the first temple, national exile, the people in need of divine mercy. That's when God reveals more about the Messiah's coming and death in passages like Daniel 9, 24 to 27. And then we have the destruction of the second temple and no rebuilding after that. So in that system is no longer accessible, attainable for the Jewish people. What has happened is Messiah's come and made atonement for us. So Daniel 9, 24 to 27 really does lay that out. And then, of course, the central text of Isaiah 52:13 to 53:12, you alluded to Isaiah, which speaks of his sacrificial death on our behalf. From there now, since the Messiah did come when he had to come, before the second temple was destroyed, rejected by his people, crucified, risen from the dead in accordance with the prophetic scriptures, since those things did happen right on schedule, and the temple then destroyed as the Messiah warned it would be, now we look to the New Testament writers to give us the further insight. And there, if you really study in particular Hebrews 7, 8, and 9, even into the 10th chapter, but 7, 8, and 9 really open this up in terms of the high priest that we have, and in terms of how these sacrifices could only go so far. They ultimately point to the Messiah. So you'll have some of that already in the Hebrew Bible, Anthony, but most of it is now going to be the Hebrew scriptures foreshadowing the Messiah's coming. He comes right on schedule, dies, rises on schedule, rejected by his people on schedule, becomes a light to the nations of the world, all right on schedule. So now we look to his followers to give us further insight, and they take these things further. You do also have a picture like Numbers 35, that the death of the high priest would bring atonement, would stand in for bloodshed, and the unintentional killer would be released from the city of refuge. We can see that as a foreshadowing of the Messiah's atoning death, but it doesn't speak there of the end of a system as much as the atoning power of the death of the righteous. So again, some foreshadowing prophecy in the Hebrew Bible, then with the fulfillment coming, the New Testament writers further elucidate that. Hey, great talking with you. And sorry we can't get to all of your calls, but tomorrow on Line of Fire, during the day, that's Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. So if you got a Jewish-related question you couldn't get through tonight, God willing, tomorrow we'll try to take your call. Be blessed. Follow the truth wherever it leads. It's worth it. Hey friends, thanks so much for being part of today's broadcast. I want to speak to you for a moment. If you are a follower of Jesus the Messiah, would you partner with me in bringing the good news of Yeshua to the lost sheep of the house of Israel? Is there anything more sacred or precious we could do together in the Lord? Friends, we have resources we need to get out in Hebrew. We have enhancements we need to put on our Real Messiah website. We need more help to answer the many questions that come in from Jewish Jewish inquirers and from those wanting to know about the Jewish roots of the faith. And this is something we can do together with your help. Paul said the gospel is to the Jew first and also to the Gentiles. So join with me today in reaching the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Right now, take a moment and go to Ask Dr. Brown, askdrbrown.org, and click on Donate.